I am Dr. Nafis Ahmed, presently working as Assistant Professor in the Faculty of Legal Studies of South Asian University. It is a new institution, a diplomatic one and international one that has recently been established and sponsored by all the SAARC nations, and the same institution has also been recognized by the United Nations organizations and given a diplomatic status. Today, I am proposing a new topic, that is protection of refugees under international law. Basically, when we talk of refugees, it means we are talking of certain important vulnerable groups who have been deprived of certain important guarantees under international law. That is why the question of protection of refugees has attained a very important dimension. Once United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has also remarked that human rights violations are a major factor in causing the flight of refugees, as well as an obstacle to their safe and voluntary return home. Safeguarding human rights in countries of origin is therefore critical both for the prevention of life as well as solution of refugee problems. Respect for human rights is also essential for the protection of refugees, not only under international law, but within the national jurisdictions as well. The three important understandings must be taken into consideration while appreciating the plight of refugees. At the same time, what possible solutions may be there for their what we call integration as well as rehabilitation and assimilation in their own country of origin or in third countries. Refugees are the most marginalized community. Even one of the most important thinker on refugee jurisprudence as well as on refugee discourse, Hannah Arendt, has also proposed that first of all we should try to understand what exactly are the rights of refugees. It means refugees have the rights to have rights. Even the Auden's poem on refugees is another important indication that has also talked of rights of refugees. At this stage, the basic and the most important question that strikes to my mind is, who is a refugee? What are the rights of refugees? How many guarantees have been given and provided under 1951 convention relating to the status of refugees with its additional protocol of 1967. These are the two important instruments at international law which are considered to be the most protective mechanisms available for the protection of refugees. So, basic and the most foremost question that comes to my mind is, who is a refugee? How many grounds that have been given under this particular convention? There are as many as 5 important grounds apart from the definition of refugees. And what other human rights dimensions which are involved in the protection of refugees? There are certain important arrangements which have been agreed upon among the Committee of Nations under international human rights law as well, like UN guidelines of 1998 on internally displaced persons. Even at a regional direction, Kampala Convention on IDPs, that is popularly known as African Convention, Article 3 of UN Convention on Torture, non-refoulement or non-discrimination, that is another important dimension that has also been enunciated under Article 33 of 1951 Convention of Refugees. Article 14 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that is another important universal declaration that has also been agreed upon, that there are certain important guarantees which are exclusively designed for protecting refugees. Another important one is the UN Convention of 1951, that is another important article, that is Article 31. Article 33 of the Refugee Convention that takes into account, as I have already just mentioned, that is non-refoulement. Article 52 of Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties, that is also has also given 4 types of what we call of reservations which cannot be entered into, which cannot be invoked in case of what we call any kind of a violations of refugee protections. Another important dimension that is that which must be understood, and that is who is a refugee. 1951 UN Convention relating to the status of refugees defines the meaning of who is a refugee under Article 1A subclause 2, and it goes like this, that is in inverted commas, and I am reproducing the exact language. A refugee is a person who, owing to a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a social group or political opinion, is outside the country of his origin, is unable or unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country, or who is not having a nationality and being outside the country of his former habitual residence as a result of such events, is unable or owing to such fear is unwilling to return to it. So, this is the definition that has been provided under Article 1 of the Refugee Convention of 1951, that is popularly known as Geneva Conventions. Sometimes it is also known as the UN Convention on the status relating to the refugees. At this stage, causes of refugee flight must be understood. Though there are number of causes which are generally attributed for the flight of refugees, and just now as I have told you that in the definition also, there are as many as 5 important grounds of flight of refugees. Because of these grounds, there are some certain other reasons are also there. Suppose construction of big dams, desertification, hexicological imbalances, seismological activities, and climate change. Other factors are also be attributed to the what we call refugee flight, that is development. In the name of development, number of reckless activities are generally undertaken by the private actors as well as the non-actors, non-state actors, and they also contribute a lot for the flight of refugees. That is why these are the these generally constitute the causes of refugee flight that has tremendously what we call resulted in some kind of a plight of refugees. Basically, when we are going to talk about the protection of refugees under international law, basically under international law there are 3 important streams must be undertaken while understanding the what kind of a protection mechanism is available for the protection of refugees. That is, number 1, international refugee law as such, international humanitarian law, international human rights law, and at the same time to a very great extent even the new emergence of what we call of international criminal law that has also offered some kind of a protection of refugees. These are the various branches of international law, and that is why we would be in a very systematic and categorical manner we are going to understand what exactly are the protections available to the refugees under different branches of international law, and what has been the entire overview of international law, and how international law is making available certain important guarantees, protections, as well as other important dimensions which are exclusively taken into account the flight of refugees as well as the plight of refugees. So, under international law, that is popularly known as jus gentium, or you may also call law of nations. That is nothing but the body of rules where under international transactions are generally undertaken by the states or other important entities which have been recognized under international law. So, main subject matter of international law has always been the states, but we are witnessing the 2 important developments in the later half of the 20th century, and these developments are popularly known as that not only the states have been recognized as the subject matter of international law, but of late in the later half of the 20th century even the individuals as well as the private entities have also been recognized or regarded as a subject matter of international law. And that is why international law has also undertaken its own understanding as well as other important dimensions while appreciating the protection mechanism not only to refugees, but other vulnerable groups have also been recognized under international law. In other words, a foreign national, if he is subjected to any kind of a discrimination in any other foreign territory, then the nationality of that particular gentleman comes into picture, and his belonging to a particular nation state, and that nation's comes at the forefront to understand what kind of a behavior, what kind of a treatment has been meted out to its own nationals. So, in such a situation, that particular nation state comes into what we call at the forefront while protecting its own nationals in outside the its territory. Another important dimensions that is also very important, and that is that is two important what we call practices. I mean, the practices of the states becomes very important. International institutions, treatment of what we call minorities and indigenous people, and that derives its protection policies from norms and nuances impregnated in the what we call in the protection mechanism which are available in different instruments under international law. Whereas the refugee protection under international law inevitably envisioned by having resort to human rights standards, and whatever the guarantees have also been agreed upon in various international human rights instruments, that is also resorted. Under international law, refugee protection has been made available in one of the most important convention, that is 1951 convention relating to the status of refugees. Another important convention has also been recognized and agreed upon among the Committee of Nations under the auspices of the United Nations organization, that is 1954 convention relating to statelessness. Another important convention on the same issue, how to carry out the reduction of statelessness under international law. Then another important United Nations convention has also been agreed upon, that is popularly known as the 1961 UN Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness. That is another important what we call convention that takes into account. Apart from this international mechanism and international protections which are available for protecting the refugees, even certain important arrangements have also been made under regional mechanisms. Suppose we can take an example of 1966 Bangkok Principles, which are exclusively designed for protecting refugees. Another important one is 1969 OAU Convention relating that is also governing specific aspects of refugee problems in Africa, and that is also protecting refugees at regional level. Another important regional convention in the form of a declaration that has also been agreed upon, particularly among the Latin American countries, that is popularly known as the 1984 Cartagena Declaration, that also takes into account the various dimensions, various what we call facets of refugee protection. Even on the 20th anniversary of Latin American countries, as many as 18 Latin American countries have also adopted the Mexican Declaration on the plight of refugees. At this stage, I would like to discuss one of the most important what we call facets of international law, and that is, what are the sources of international law? Is there any political determinate or supreme authority that legislate international legislations? As generally it is seen within the national jurisdictions, we do not have such kind of a mechanism within international law. Though legislations are not there, but there are certain important conventions, declaration, pacts, charters, paragraphs and principles which are generally agreed upon on specific themes relating to the protection of refugees in the area of international refugee law, in the area of international human rights law, in the area of international humanitarian law, in the area of international criminal law. Whereas so far international law as such is concerned, we are having number of what we call sources. Many sources are generally attributed. We can, broadly speaking, we can categorize these important what we call sources into two broad components. One are the formal sources of international law, another one is the informal sources of international law. Under Article 38 of the Statute of International Court of Justice, certain important formal as well as informal sources of international law have also been recognized. Suppose international conventions, international customs, that is also considered to be as an evidence of general accepted law, general principles of law. These are some of the most important facets of the sources of international law. Whereas international treaties, which are generally considered to be the contracts among the various nation states, have also been what we call recognized. As I have already mentioned, treaties are sometimes known as customs, sometimes covenants, sometimes charters, pacts, etc., etc. And these these treaties are legally binding, and these treaties have also been recognized under the full-fledged law on at international level on treaties, and that has been initiated in one of the most important convention, that is Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties of 1969. Well, at this stage, another important dimension which is of vital importance, and that can also be understood from Article 2 of Vienna Convention of 1969, and that simply lays down that agreements or contracts in the written form which are concluded among the various states bilaterally or multilaterally are binding upon those states who become the parties to that very particular agreement. That is the spirit of Article 2. Whereas another important article of Vienna Convention of Law of Treaties of 1969 is of vital importance, and that particular article is Article 26, where one of the most and finest fundamental principles of international businesses and international transactions among the Committee of Nations have also been agreed upon and beautifully enunciated under this particular article, that is Article 26, that is popularly known as the Pacta Sunt Servanda. It means all the agreements among the Committee of Nations must be performed in letter and spirit. That is the beauty. Even the Professor Anzilotti on this particular point has also seconded it and strengthened this particular argument that Pacta Sunt Servanda is the bedrock of international transactions among the various nation states. So this particular dimension under all circumstances be appreciated. There are various other important states which are generally undertaken, I mean general stages, various stages which are generally undertaken while concluding certain important treaties. Suppose first stage is popularly known as adoption, second one is popularly known as, that is signing, how the treaties are adopted, what are the stages, what are the mechanisms which are available for adopting the treaties, and the second most important stage is popularly known as the signing of the treaties. And signing of the treaties is also amounts to what we call acceding and conceding the consent to a particular nation states consent to that particular treaty which has been concluded among the various states or bilaterally or multilaterally. Another important what we call stage is known as the ratification. Most multilateral treaties expressly postulate for states to express their consent to be bound by the signing of that particular treaty, and that is popularly known as the ratification. Ratification or instrument of ratifications is generally submitted to the Secretary General of the United Nations Organization under the UN Charter. Ratification gives states the opportunity to pursue domestic approval for the treaty as generally provided under the constitutions. Each and every nation state in their national jurisdictions has made certain important provisions in the constitution itself. All the constitutions are having certain important provisions. Suppose the Constitution of India under Article 253 of the Constitution, 253 has made certain important provisions which are generally available how to enter into treaties at international level with other national governments among the Committee of Nations. So that particular mandate is available under this particular article to the Government of India, whereas each and every nation state, not only in this part of the world but everywhere, each and every constitution is having certain important provisions which are available for what we call entering into treaties or declaring certain important obligations at international level, and that is generally done as a sovereign duty, as a sovereign function by the national governments. Another important stage that takes me to what we call how to conclude, how to take into account the different what we call sources of international law and with regard to treaty. So, treaty, that particular the another important stage that is available, that is acceptance and approval. That is another important what we call there are number of stages, number of what we call mechanisms which are generally undertaken, and acceptance and approval of a particular treaty happens to be one of them on the part of the national government. So, acceptance and approval also amounts to some kind of a what we call binding nature, some kind of a what we call obligation on the part of the national government. Another stage, that is another dimension which is available for protecting the rights of refugees. Then the how treaties have also taken into consideration the different dimensions for the protection of refugees. Then another important what we call obligation which is generally taken by the national governments while adopting the treaties, whether it is for the protection of refugees or any other what we call vulnerable group within the national jurisdiction or beyond the national jurisdiction. That stage is also known as accession. Accession is also known as adherence or adhesion, and that is another important what we call that is another important legal effect of ratification, or that amounts to what we call of ratification. So, these are the different stages how the treaties are generally adopted, how the treaties are terminated, how the treaties are generally upheld by the national governments, and that too within the spirit of 1969 Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties. This argument also takes me to another important what we call dimension, and that is that dimension is also very much relevant and germane to the protection of what we call of refugees, and that takes me to another important stage that is known as the customary international law. So, customary international law, what exactly is the meaning of the customary international law, how customary international law is important for protecting refugees. So, there are certain fundamental principles which have been agreed upon among the Committee of Nations, not only agreed upon among the Committee of Nations, but at the same time these stages, these particular idea of customary international law is relating to those fundamental principles which are very dear to each and every national government, to each and every national, reflected in the each and every national constitution, and to a very great extent as it is axiomatic from the expression itself, customary. So, on the basis of international customs, certain important usages and practices have also been agreed upon, and these practices are reflected in the functions, in the dimensions of national governments while attending such issues like protection of refugees, protection of minorities, protection of indigenous people, or transacting certain important businesses under international humanitarian law, under international criminal law, under international human rights law. Then these the dimensions of customary international law becomes very important. It means suppose if I can give you an example, there is a fundamental agreement among all the Committee of Nations, and that is right to life. That is the most substantive life. We are not talking of the quality of life, we are not talking of the processual or procedure relating to the right to life, but at the same time there is an fundamental agreement among all the Committee of Nations, among all the nations, that there is this fundamental right, that is right to life. Whether we are living in United States of America, whether somebody is living in Germany, France, or anywhere in the world, or some remote part of Africa continent, but there is an agreement, there is an understanding that is very fundamental, very germane to the human existence, and that is right to life. So, that comes within the purview of customary international law. There are these acts which are generally taken, or these acts which are generally have become the part of what we call of the customary international law. These are popularly known as the settled practices of the states, which have also been recognized as opinio juris, or opinion of the jurist. Customary law is binding all states except those who objected during its formation. When customary international law is being formed, when certain important practices were rummaged and debated, at this stage if somebody has not given any kind of opposition to those important fundamental practices which subsequently came to be known as settled practices, and those settled practices amounted to customary international law or constituted customary international law, then subsequent derogation or divagation therefrom is not at all possible, and that cannot be allowed. Evidence of custom can also be found, suppose for example, in resolutions of the United Nations General Assembly, diplomatic correspondence, the opinion of the state legal advisors, the conclusions of international conferences, bilateral treaties, and voting patterns of resolutions which are generally mooted in the United Nations General Assembly. Many academics, many scholars and experts argue that the benchmark set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is considered to be the non-binding in its character, but as such of late Universal Declaration of Human Rights has also came to be recognized as one of the most important manifestation and materialization of customary international law. There are certain important articles which are available under what we call this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and these principles in 1948, when it was initially on 10th of December was agreed upon and recognized, accepted and adopted by the Committee of Nations, but subsequently there were certain fundamental guarantees which have also been what we call given to this particular or in other words we may also put it like this, there are certain important what we call articles which have attained the status of just cogence under international law. Just cogence are the preemptive norms of international law, where from no reservation, no exemption, no derogation, no what we call exclusion is possible. Under all circumstances, it is the fundamental duty of state parties, or whether a particular state is a party or not to that particular fundamental principle, but under all circumstances the states are under an obligation that they should what we call prefer and they should what we call endorse their actions within the in conformity with that of the fundamental principles agreed upon under Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, despite its being a non-binding instrument of an international character, even then on the when it has been recognized and observed under the broadly of what we call of customary international law, it has become binding upon all the states, and whatever the certain important practices which are reflected in the area of international human rights law, international refugee law, and international humanitarian law, international criminal law, all the states are bound by the letter and spirit of this particular instrument. And moreover, it by way of implication, Universal Declaration of Human Rights has also become binding one, because when it becomes the part of what we call of International Bill of Human Rights, where other two instruments are also there, that is the two generations of human rights instruments have also become the part of the International Bill of Human Rights, or International Bill of Human Rights is constituted with these three important universal instruments on human rights, that is 1966 Convention UN Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and 1966 UN Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, along with Universal Declaration of Human Rights constitute the International Bill of Human Rights. So, by this mechanism, by way of this kind of a what we call assemblage, by way of this kind of a conflation of international human rights instruments that is constituted under International Bill of Human Rights, it becomes binding on the state parties. And so far the utility and importance of customary international law is concerned, whatever the fundamental principles, whatever the fundamental obligations have been agreed upon, recognized by the Committee of Nations, which constitute customary international law, it means whether a particular national government or a national party or high contracting party is a party to that particular international practice or national practice which constitute customary international law, it is immaterial. But once it has been recognized under the under the garb of customary international law, that becomes applicable, that becomes binding, that becomes recognizable by the Committee of Nations, and nobody can seek any kind of an exemption from such kind of practices so far customary international law is concerned. There are certain important examples of just cogence, because just cogence is considered to be the bedrock of customary international law. Therefore, what are the examples which can be given in understanding the various facets of just cogence, like prohibition of slavery, prohibition of torture, prohibition of discrimination, prohibition of use of force by the states, if it is except according to law or authorized under the international law, or exercised exclusively in self-defense. These are the various examples which can be attributed in case of any kind of violations of international law. So, these are the general examples which are generally understood, but these examples constitute the most important facets of customary international law. In each and every case, suppose we can give another important example for the protection of refugees. Suppose example of Article 33 is of vital importance. Article 33 of United Nations Convention or relating to the status of refugees. That particular article has of late attained the status of just cogence under international law. So, that fundamental principle of just cogence has also been recognized under customary international law. So, article various articles, particularly article 52 of Vienna Convention of Law of Treaties of 1969 recognizes this particular article of Refugee Convention, that is article 33, and the mandate and most important spirit of this particular article goes like this, that no person should be expelled or forcefully what he called deported from the country of reception to his country of origin, where he is having some kind of an apprehension or well founded fear of being persecuted exclusively on the grounds which have been mentioned under article 1 of 1951 convention relating to the status of refugees, and that takes into account the definition part. So, that becomes very important. Another important fundamental principle, apart from in addition to the customary international law, that also takes into account that what are the other fundamental principles which are available for protecting the refugees. So, that is why general principles, what are the general principles of law, that is international rule of law, international practices of the states, element of reciprocity, element of what we call of the fundamental principles of consent, equality of states, that has also been recognized under article 4 of the United Nations Charter, and good faith, that constitute what we call, and that comes and that has also been recognized as one of the manifestations or many of the manifestations of what we call general principles of international law. So, another important what we call mechanism which is also available, how to what we call made protection available to the refugees, and that is subsidiary means of determination of rule of law. How to determine rule of law, what are the what should be the criteria, how it is generally attributed to various what we call states, particularly article 38 of the statutes of International Court of Justice becomes very important so far the determination of rule of law is concerned. How? Suppose take the example International Court of Justice, how it is done. Another important body that has also contributed a lot for the determination of the rule of law, that is Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Another important examples and cases can also be taken from the European Court of Human Rights, African Courts of Human Rights, Inter-American system of what we call of the dispensation of justice. These are various what we call stages, various what we call mechanisms, various bodies which has contributed a lot for what we call protecting refugees. Another important examples of general principles of law can also be given from earlier what we call jurisprudence. Earlier jurisprudence means, suppose I can give you an example of the Kindler versus Canada, that is one of the most important decision that has been delivered on the scope of human rights obligations by the International Human Rights Committee. But International Human Rights Committee and now International Human Rights Commission as well as committee has already been substituted by the International Human Rights Council, and this particular council is not at all bound by its own earlier decisions or its previous visages. Whatever the decisions this particular council has undertaken, these decisions can be what we call given in under the while taking into consideration the new circumstances, under the new light, under the new what we call developments. That is why we are of the view that whatever the decisions have been taken by this particular judicial body, these decisions may create some kind of a novelty, and it is not at all bound by them, as generally we witness within the national jurisdictions, because even in India under article 141 of the Constitution of India, the subordinate judiciary is bound by the decisions which have been delivered by the highest judicial establishment of the country, and that is why it is the fundamental duty of the subordinate judiciary to abide by those particular precedents as well as the decisions which have been handed down by the highest judicial arbiter of the country, that is the Honorable Supreme Court of India. So, that is the fundamental duty, and that takes me to another important dimension which is also available for the protection of the refugees as well as the vulnerable groups within the national boundaries and beyond the national boundaries, and that is the dimension, or you may also call it the concept of soft law. What is soft law? Soft law, generally there are several instruments, resolutions, conclusions and decisions which are generally adopted and selected by the political organs of the international organizations as well as international bodies. And suppose Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as this example I have already given, but this example is considered to be a soft law. Another form of declarations which are not at all binding upon the state parties, that is also considered to be an example of soft law. This soft law has also produced a number of what we call inspirations, number of emulations, number of what we call manifestations and examples which must be emulated by the national governments, and the various examples which can be given on such occasions, particularly while discussing the issue of soft law, then the United Nations General Assembly resolutions, that is one example. Resolutions of the UN Commission on Human Rights and the new Human Rights Council as its replacement, whatever the resolutions are passed by these bodies, that is also the manifestation of what we call of international soft law. Another important one is that is the general comments and recommendations made by the United Nations treaty bodies and the treaty system, that is also what we call constituted as one of the most important manifestations of the soft law. ExComm resolutions, executive committee resolutions, which are generally undertaken by the various the agencies, particularly the one of the most important agency that has been entrusted with the responsibility of carrying out the welfare and assistance and humanitarian programs for the welfare and the reintegration, assimilation and finding durable solutions for the refugees, that is United Nations High Commission for Refugees, that is UNHCR. So, that is its resolutions, its executive committee becomes very important, and its resolutions are also the manifestations of the soft law. So, that is why the soft law has also playing a very important role, and that takes me to another important dimension, that is the of refugee protection. What are the fundamental principles and objectives which are available for protecting refugees? Then one of the most important protection mechanism that is available, that in case of any kind of a mass influx, then the civilian character of maintaining the civilian character of asylum should be the first important fundamental principle. Interface between refugee protection and migration control, that is another important dimension, and that must also be taken into consideration as fundamental objectives. Another important dimension that is generally attributed, that is barriers to entry, what are the barriers which are generally created for refugees before taking into consideration any kind of a protection. So, it is the fundamental mandate under these articles of 1951 convention relating to the status of refugees, that in the absence of any kind of a travel document, in the absence of any kind of a proper visa, in the absence of any kind of a any kind of requisite papers which are not available, and so any kind of an entry should not be prohibited. It is the fundamental duty of each and every national government that when somebody is knocking its doors and seeking some kind of a asylum as a refugee, or some kind of a what we call seeking political asylum, then it must under all circumstances be made available. We should not create such kind of a concept like all white Australia concept, because the Australian refugee policy has really posed a lot of challenges for the international community. So, these are some of the most important what we call examples. At the same time, it is the fundamental duty of the refugee officials and personnel to adopt a single procedure for providing any kind of assistance to refugees. At the same time, their confidentiality and other important what we call measures relating to confidentiality must also be what we call taken into consideration. What are the rights of refugees within the national jurisdiction? Though we have been talking of rights of refugees under international law, but at the same time it is equally important, and I can give you an example from the Indian jurisprudence as well. One of the most important and highly celebrated decision that has been handed down by the apex court of the land, that is the Honorable Supreme Court of India, and this decision is popularly known as the Khudiram Chakma decision, and that is popularly known as the Khudiram Chakma versus State of Arunachal Pradesh. That is the decision which has been handed down under Article 21 of the Constitution of India. Because this is the beauty of Article 21 of the Constitution of India, it begins with the word no person, and no person includes aliens also, foreigners also, non-nationals also. So, for the first time a wider spectrum of adjudication was attributed by the Supreme Court of India to this particular expression, because Article 21 begins with the word no person shall be deprived of his life except according to the procedure established by law. No person shall be deprived of his life and personal liberty. It means no person. It does not include citizen. Person includes citizens as well, but at the same time it also includes aliens, foreigners and other segments of the society or other persons who do not happen to be the citizen of India. So, Article 21 is of vital importance, and for the first time this particular decision, an entire ambit of Article 21, particularly the word person, has also been given a new dimension. So, that is really a fundamental a very fantastic example which really made available for the protection of refugees, because whether it is Article 28, 29, 30 as well as 31 of the 1951 Convention of relating to the refugees with its additional protocol of 1967. So, national legislations as well as international what we call conventions, they came together, they complement each other in the absence of any kind of a national legislation as well as what we call customary international law. They constitute and they provide some kind of a semblance of protection to the refugees. At this stage, this particular dimension gives another important or another question arises, that is how to determine the refugee status, and what is the purpose of determination of refugee status, what is the rationale behind the determination of the refugee status. That the most fundamental question is, what is refugee determination status? Basically, refugee determination process, it's a kind of a exercise which is undertaken by the refugee authorities and refugee personnel to determine who constitute a refugee, who is eligible to be qualified as a refugee as per the Article 1 of the 1951 Convention. So, that is the basic and the most fundamental motto, and why it is necessary just to implement the obligations which have been agreed upon under 1951 Convention. That is the fundamental obligation on the part of the refugee authorities to come out with some kind of a resolution of the refugee problem. That is why how to implement refugee obligations, how to implement the mandate of 1951 convention, that can only be made possible by what we call arriving at the conclusion while appreciating the fundamental obligation, which is very much relating to the what we call refugee status determination exercise. We also determine refugee status individually. We also determine refugee status collectively or in a form of a group. Mass influx of refugees may also be determined with certain important conditions. Then basic and the most fundamental protection mechanism which is available in the refugee determination process is that under all circumstances refoulement, non-refoulement principles must also be upheld. That is the fundamental duty. As I have already mentioned in my earlier submissions, at some stage that the non-refoulement is generally perceived as the jus cogens and has become the part of the customary international law. And there are certain important rights of refugees, other protections which are available to refugees. These protections and rights must also be taken care of along with the important benefits like protection against threats to the physical security, access to courts, freedom of movement, family reunion, special measures for protecting, and I am making available the what we call this documentary or identity documents, and that is the most important. And the last submission on this particular occasion would be that how to find out the durable solutions and what are the durable solutions and what is the durability of the durable solutions. So that becomes very important. Where durable solutions are popularly known as the voluntary repatriation, local integration and resettlement in the third country. These constitute this trinity of particular popularly known as what we call the durable solutions. So these are the various guarantees, various mechanisms under international human rights law. Minimum standards, specific standards have also been agreed upon, and international humanitarian law is also another important branch of international law that also takes into account the protection of those persons who are not taking the part in the hostilities or are not capable, no longer capable to take part in the hostilities. That is, they are also protected under international humanitarian law. Whereas under international criminal law, there are certain important what we call guarantees which have been made available for protecting refugees, particularly crimes against humanity, war crimes and genocide, torture, rape and other important crimes. And against these crimes, certain important protections have also been made available to the people at large, particularly of refugees or the people who are in flight. Another important dimensions which have also been taken care of, that is another important one, and that takes into account how to what we call, what are the special cases, what are the common understandings which are available with regard to the refugee protection. We should review the negative decisions. Return of asylum seekers must also be made or must also be guaranteed flight to remain until decision on their visa and other important items have not been undertaken by the competent authorities. And durable solutions issues must also be taken care of. That is, these are the different dimensions of what we call of the refugee protections under international law. But at the same time, it is not the conclusion, rather it is the beginning to take a call on the refugee protection. And this is what I wanted to submit. If you have further inquiries, further comments and observations, my address is also available in these particular particularly I would also be submitting this address, particularly my email ID. You may contact me. Thank you very much for being with me and for your patience. Thank you very much. Thanks.